Hey everybody. So Tim Pool went on Joe Rogan's podcast recently, and Tim Pool he's one of these guys that like says he's on the left and like says he's a liberal, but then like every time like he talks about politics, he'll just like spend 99% of his time talking about why he thinks that like PC culture and identity politics are bad, and then like he'll be like, and I honestly like agree with Trump. Like that this is the kind of guy that Tim Pool is. He like says he's on the left, but then like he agrees with conservatives like most of the time, and like most of the things he talks about is just like bagging on like the left. And then he fits this role of like conservatives like Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro. Like they'll be like, oh, I talk to left wingers, like I talk to Tim Pool, and then like Tim Pool is just not on the left. And so it's just that's kind of the avenue that Tim Pool fills. So he's talking with Joe Rogan, and the topic of socialism comes up, and so I wanted to share this clip with you guys and then kind of talk about it along the way. So let's take a look.
When you look at people that are anti-capitalist, they're really into socialism. One of the things you find is a lot of rich kids.
It's weird, right?
It's fucking real weird. It's because they don't understand real struggle, because they've grown up without it, and they have these ideals. Like they feel guilty because they've grown up without struggle, and they want to help the world, and they think capitalism is evil. And I never saw my dad, so we need to get all these rich people, and they need to give that money to all these poor people.
I feel like so there's a little bit to unpack there with this kind of stereotype. It's really funny because the stereotype he's talking about of this socialist being these like rich, well-off people, it's actually kind of the stereotype that I think a lot of people attribute to like libertarianism. Just like the libertarian base is just like young, well-off white men. Like that is like the entirety of the Libertarian Party. You know, people who are kind of like born on third base, thinking they hit a triple, you know, kind of believing that just, you know, greed is good and you just gotta like, oh, the free market will take care of everything. Like that's kind of the demographic I feel like most people associate with libertarians. There is also this kind of like Bernie bro narrative that exists, where it's like, oh, all of Bernie Sanders supporters are just these young, rich white guys. And I just if you just look at the data when it comes to like Bernie Sanders supporters, I mean that's just not the case. I mean Bernie Sanders overwhelmingly won with Hispanic voters, and then when it came to like the youth vote, I mean he trounced every other person when it came to young people of color. And so this like kind of stereotype that is just like a bunch of like rich white kids just doesn't exactly hold up. I mean, if you're looking at Bernie Sanders supporters, and like, I mean, I feel like if I don't know what is more representative of this kind of like socialist movement, if that's what you want to call it, going on in the United States. There really isn't like a true socialist movement happening right now, just because I mean, there's nobody, or at least in the mainstream, that's arguing for like total socialism. And so like, you know, when these guys are talking about socialism, I'm assuming they're talking about Bernie Sanders' brand of socialism, which is really just social democracy. And so just this narrative, I don't fully believe to be correct. I'd be very interested to see any data that is actually like what is the reality, but I don't think that is the reality of the situation. But let's just say, for example, it was. Let's just say that it, you know, a lot of people who identify as socialists, they are these like well-off rich kids. Is it such a bad thing if they are like, hey, I was born with like a lot of privileges that other people don't have, and so I think that I should be taxed higher and that money should be redistributed to like different social welfare programs that will give everybody an equal opportunity? Like, is that like such a bad thing? It's one of those things where like, you know, if you're poor and you argue for like welfare and redistribution, it's like, oh, you're just lazy and you just want people to hand you stuff. And then it's like, if you're rich and you want to argue for redistribution and welfare, then you're just like either insincere or you just don't understand. And so it's just like nobody's allowed to argue for redistribution or just welfare in general. It's just they'll just smear it all the way. And so that's a bit of the problem. But you know, let's keep going.
Balance out income.
You know what else they notice? The people around them were all white.
People that are into socialism,
the people that are into socialism tend to be upper class, upper middle.
I just love kind of the pause that Joe Rogan gives there, like when Tim Pool is like, you know what they all are? They're all white. Like it's just like, Joe Rogan's like, what are you talking about exactly? It's just because, okay, Tim Pool is like one of these guys that will go on and on about how much he hates identity politics and how much he hates that, like, oh, you shouldn't talk about identity politics so much. Oh, we shouldn't talk about this like PC culture. You know, like, oh, like I think we should just pick the best person for the job. We should never like think about identity whatsoever. We should just, you know, best person for the job. And then like when it's like this like ideology that he doesn't agree with, he's like, psh, it's just a bunch of white people. Like, psh, you can't believe him. Like, it's just a bunch of like self-loathing white people. It's like basically like kind of what he's saying. And so it's just like he doesn't want to talk about like identity, but then like, oh, now he's going to talk about identity. I mean, he's the one, like Joe Rogan wasn't talking about race and he was talking about just rich kids, and then Tim Pool decided to bring up race, and then like he literally constantly talks about how much he hates identity politics. But then this is what he decides to bring up.
Class,
obviously, we're
white.
generalizing in a big way here.
Right.
A lot of
but
them.
there's some studies, some research that came out that finds the
Yeah.
overwhelming majority of socialists in the United States,
Yeah.
they came from upper middle class to upper class families that tended to be white.
Yeah.
And then I feel like, he's talking about this, like, this research, and I would be very interested to see this research. If anybody, like, knows of this, if they could, like, comment it down below, I would be super interested to see it. But, I mean, if we could just, let's just look at, like, the House of Representatives, for example. Look at Congress. Like, the three most prominent, like, socialists, quote-unquote, AOC, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. Ilhan Omar was a refugee, so not exactly the most, like, privileged person. AOC was a bartender before she entered Congress, and I actually don't know where Rashida Tlaib came from. I actually don't know that. I know that she's Palestinian, but I honestly don't know exactly her history. But still, these aren't exactly the pictures of privilege that Tim Pool is talking about. And I guess the other person that you could mention is Bernie Sanders. But I mean, Bernie Sanders was a blue collar worker for pretty much most of his life. Like, he worked as like a school teacher, and I think he was a carpenter for a little bit. He did a bunch of like odd jobs. Not exactly like this like super privileged person. So it's just like, I like I said, if you know of this study that Tim Pool is referring to, please leave a comment down below. But I just don't think that this narrative that he's trying to like set up is entirely accurate. But even if it was, I mean, all right, let's just keep going.
Those are the ones that focus so hard on these social justice warrior issues.
You take a person who's been surrounded by rich white people.
Yes.
They probably got a reason to not like them, but then they assume all white people are the same, and you end up seeing this
Yes.
racialization of politics.
Also, they find themselves in a position of affluence that they didn't earn. They want to burn it all to the ground.
Yep.
It's...
And they assume, I think there's some truth in that. That there's people who have money they didn't earn, and they're leeches on the system. They make money from money. They've never done anything in their lives.
Sure.
They're arrogant.
Sure, there's a lot of people like that.
Right, but, when you then take that generalization and apply it to anyone who has money or everyone, and,
Right.
you take it to a dark place.
Exactly.
When I
I would just like to point out that this like dark place that he's referring to is just like Medicare for all, free college, minimum wage, a living wage. Like this is what the mainstream far left movement is advocating for. Like, these are the policies. I know that people will really like to straw man a lot of like left-wing ideas, like what is prominent in like these lefty circles. I mean, these aren't like crazy radical dark ideas. There's no like it's just not what he's making it out to be. And so it's just this whole idea is it's all burn it all down, and this was honestly fed in part by this Bernie Sanders political revolution speak. But Bernie Sanders wasn't really advocating for anything that would like really like destroy capitalism or anything. He was just advocating for a super strong welfare state. I mean, that was the bulk of what he was advocating for. And these are things that like most of the developed world has. And like, people always say like, oh, Bernie Sanders calls himself, he talks about Scandinavia and they're not really socialist. They're actually capitalist. But it's like, okay, Bernie Sanders is arguing for us to be more like Scandinavia. So it's like, you're going to say that he's like trying to burn it all down, but he's trying to make it like Scandinavia, and you guys literally are saying that Scandinavia is capitalist, so he's not trying to burn it all down, ? It just doesn't really, the logic just doesn't really follow, in my opinion. But let's keep going.
first started, entering the public space in terms of news and politics, I was at Occupy Wall Street. And before I had any notoriety, I was being heralded. They called me a good example of what's wrong with the system. Here's Tim Pool, a high school dropout, mixed race guy, and here he is just sleeping in a dirt park using his phone to tell the real stories of the world. After I got featured in Time magazine, what did they say? Tim Pool is white, and he was born with a silver spoon, which is not true. It's absolutely not true. But the socialist types, the activists, couldn't accept that I had, jumped the class system, I guess. Their view of the world is rigid, that the rich people keep the poor down, there's no chance for upward mobility, and that's not the case. You absolutely can become successful from, humble means.
So I think it's really important to bring up, like, yeah, it is possible to, like, start from the bottom and make it to the top. Totally possible. But, like, it's not really super possible as much as people like Tim Pool, like to think. Like, I get it. He is someone that, started, very low, and now he's doing well for himself. That just isn't like as common though. And like this like idea of like the American dream, like there's so many studies that have come out, and then like there's lists of countries where it's like more feasible to get like the American dream than America. Like there's I literally was looking at an article the other day, and it was like 31 countries where upward mobility is like upward economic mobility is more likely in those countries than it is in the United States. To be born in the bottom half of the wealth bracket and then to move to the top quarter, 31 countries where you are more likely to do that than you are in the United States. And so, and a lot of those countries were countries that had strong welfare states, because equalizing the playing field, leveling out opportunity is how you get this like economic mobility that Tim Pool is talking about. And like obviously there are going to be examples of people who are able to really overcome adversity and like succeed, and that's great. We should, applaud that. I'm not one of these people that thinks that we should like get upset at success and downplay success. Like definitely applaud people who work hard. I think that that's honestly one of the kind of shortcomings of some left-wing arguments, is that there is this kind of demonization to an extent of success, and like I don't think that that is like as big of an issue as people like to make it. But like I do think that we should encourage like hard work and everything. Like that is like an important thing and a thing that we should be happy about. But we also need to realize that like so many people, just if they're working as hard as possible, they're still not succeeding. How many people are working like multiple minimum wage jobs and like they're just not gonna like succeed. They're not going to do well. And so that's just something to keep in mind.
AOC quotes was her talking about it's literally impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, when she used to be a waitress and now she's a congresswoman. Like
this, maybe I'm getting nitpicky here, but what AOC was specifically referring to is she was referring to the literal example of being able to pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Like if you're on your back and using the straps on your boot to lift yourself up, that is like, physically impossible. What she was getting at is that this whole, the comment, like, or the euphemism, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, was like originally like a joke. Like it wasn't like, because that's not possible. You really can't do that. And so it's like a difficult thing, but then it kind of got like taken over, and now people literally use that expression like, oh, you should pull yourself up from your bootstrap. You got to just pick yourself up out of poverty. And so what she was getting at was the literal pulling oneself up from your bootstraps. And like she has acknowledged many times that like she has done something that so many people will never do, go from being a bartender to a congressperson. I mean, you can say like, oh, AOC did it, guess there's no problem. But like if you look at like the kind of wealth makeup of people in Congress, they're so wealthy, the people in Congress. So it's like AOC is not like the norm. Like she is like the exception to the rule is what it feels like if you just look at like who actually comprises Congress. And it is getting better. There are more AOCs, Ilhan Omars entering Congress, but like they are not the norm, at least not yet.
Like you can't, like it's not impossible, but it's not even. That's what we need to address. It's not even. The reality is some people have a far easier path.
Absolutely.
And some people have a far more difficult path. It's just, but you have to deal with the hand you're given. If life is a game
and so like when Joe Rogan says, you have to deal with the hand that you're given, I think that we should definitely like the way that I look at things is like as an individual, like if you're talking to someone as an individual, tell them to work as hard as possible, do whatever you can to make the best of your situation. Like I'm like it's like you should be like this like individualist conservative like in your personal life, not like conservative on like social stuff. That's not what I'm saying. But like you should, act like everything is in your control in your personal life and work as hard as you possibly can. But then on like a societal level, we should treat everything like, oh, we're all the victims of our circumstances, and we should try and like equal out opportunity and like give everybody like the fairest chance that they have at success. I'm not talking about equalizing outcomes. I'm talking about equalizing opportunity so that everybody has a chance at achieving success. And so like on a personal level, work as hard as you can. Like do what you can. Look for that scholarship, look for that internship, look for that job, look for that whatever you can. On a personal level, that is 100% what you should do. And Joe Rogan, he speaks to someone who didn't start off from the best of situations, and he has pulled himself so far. And so like he is going to be someone that is like huge advocate for hard work, and I think that is something that we should applaud. Hard work is a good thing, but we should just look for things that can equalize opportunity, and those things are strong welfare programs.
Saying it's a game. It is life, but it's similar to a game in that you're dealt a set of cards. you're dealt a set of circumstances. And yes, some people just get four aces from birth. Your dad's a multi-billionaire and your whole family's always been rich and you never have to worry about a goddamn thing for the rest of your life. But guess what? Those people turn out to be fucking miserable and crazy. There's some benefit in being born with a shitty hand of cards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There really is a motivational benefit for sure.
And so, I mean, basically, that that's the end of the clip. I think that overall, I feel like Joe Rogan was a lot more sensible in his arguments than Tim Pool. I definitely probably agree with Joe Rogan on a lot more things that I probably disagree with Tim Pool than I agree with Tim Pool on. I mean, Joe Rogan, he didn't exactly sound like it here, but I mean, Joe Rogan does support Medicare for all. He supports universal basic income. He supports probably free college. I'm not sure where he stands on that issue. He supports a lot of actually pretty left-wing ideas. He doesn't. That's not how he's like really considered, and like he honestly, I mean, he's not exactly the most politically knowing person. I think he does know a lot, like 100%. Like I'm not trying to say that Joe Rogan doesn't know very much, but like I mean, like he's the type of guy who like will vote for the libertarian person if they like come on his podcast. You know what I mean? He was like a huge Tulsi Gabbard supporter because she came on his podcast and like he had the chance to talk to her. And like he thought that she was really good, and like he really respected that she like served in the military. And then so like with Bernie Sanders came on his podcast and he got the chance to talk to him, and then he ended up wanting to support Bernie Sanders after he heard like a lot of what Bernie Sanders had to say and like really felt like his ideas were pretty practical. But I mean, in 2016 he voted for Gary Johnson because Gary Johnson came on his podcast. He didn't like Hillary, he didn't like Trump. He's going to vote for Gary Johnson, even though obviously Gary Johnson would never support something like Medicare for all or universal basic income, which are things that Joe Rogan does support. And so I mean, he's just can be a little hypocritical, I guess, in what he supports and where he chooses to put his support. It's not like definitely very ideologically based all the time. But I think on a lot of issues, he actually gets a lot more things right than people give him credit for. I mean, he's way more anti-war than so many people in the Democratic Party. So much more anti-war. And so I think that that's something that we should really, really give him credit for. Or at least me personally, because I'm a really big anti-war person. But anyway, that's the makeup of this kind of clip. Those are kind of my thoughts. If you guys disagreed with anything I said in this video, please leave a comment down below. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.